This is Jonathan Ferguson, the Keeper of Firearms and Artillery at the Royal Armouries Museum in the UK, which houses a collection of thousands of iconic weapons from throughout history. And today we're back with the Battlefield franchise as Jonathan takes a look at the weapons of Battlefield Bad Company 2.
Something else that I really want to comment on is the weird left-hand ejection on all of the weapons. By and large, that's not a good idea because most of your soldiers are right-handed and cartridge cases flying out of the left potentially could be a problem.
If you want to see more of Jonathan's take on Battlefield, make sure to subscribe so you can also check out our videos on Battlefield 4, 1 and 5. If there are any other games, guns and mechanics that you guys want to see Jonathan break down, let us know in the comment section below. And if you'd like to help out the Royal Armouries Museum and continue to support Jonathan's work, check out the links in the description of this video. Right, over to Jonathan.
Couldn't help noticing there what seemed like an audio loop effect from the firing of that light machine gun, which is the Chinese Type 88. Something from way back in gaming that you could always pick up on was where there's a WAV file repeating where something is firing an automatic, and there's that ever so slight break in as the file loops. And I don't think that's what's happening here. I think it's been designed to fire effectively bursts for some reason, even though it is meant to be automatic. I might be overanalyzing, but as discussed, that's what I'm here for. There's a strong trend in the Battlefield games of setting them in the near future, like 5-10 years in the future, something like that. And so they have tended to anticipate what will be a standard service weapon in the near future. And I think almost invariably they get it wrong, which is no fault of theirs really, because it's to do with the political machinations and costs of things and how many of an existing perfectly good rifle that you already have. And so the AUK 971, this is a relatively early version that's been depicted here with that green, almost SA-80 looking handguard on it. And that has failed to become a standard primary issue service rifle in the Russian Armed Forces, but it has seen limited adoption. So, but not in this form. It continued to evolve, and I think the latest version is now being marketed under the Cord name, which is the name of a heavy machine gun. They must have tested that and decided that it would sell better. The Uzi appearing in Bad Company 2, we've got a reasonable representation. It's fallen into the classic trap of depicting the weapon as closed bolt, so firing from a closed bolt rather than with the bolt cocked to the rear, which is how the vast majority of Uzis work, and all of the select fire ones, and this is because you can see the selector markings and you know how it works in the game. But other than that, it's a decent rendition for the period of the classic Uzi, and from memory it does kind of underscore why you generally want an assault rifle, because it's got limited range and penetration and therefore damage, but it's got a decent capability at close quarters. So it's got its place, but increasingly on the real battlefield there's not much room for these pistol caliber automatic weapons, submachine guns. Watching this again is like not only like a weird nostalgic throwback, as I put a lot of hours into this a decade ago, but also like a weird bit of firearms history as well, because the XM8 was like the great hope for a new family of infantry weapons, and it looked futuristic and it looked cool, and then it didn't go anywhere. So this is another frozen in time, this is what the future could have been moment with Battlefield, which has happened more than once. Although weirdly the XM8 did see serial production. Of all armed forces, the Malaysian Navy has XM8s, and I think that they are marked XM8 as in experimental, and it had an interesting interface system, which is what those weird socket holes are in the side. The idea was you would plug in your accessories to those holes. This was before the Picatinny rail became truly dominant, and so it had the XM8 had its own proprietary system of attaching everything from the optics to lights and lasers and grips and things like that. So a really interesting what might have been preserved in digital form. Something else that I really want to comment on now that I have the platform to do so, because this used to drive me absolutely nuts back in the day is the weird left-hand ejection on all of the weapons. They all ejected cartridge cases to the left. Now, there are one or two weapons in existence that do that, but by and large, that's not a good idea because most of your soldiers are right-handed and cartridge cases flying out of the left potentially could be a problem. And although I've never spoken to a developer, I'm pretty sure I know why. And it's the same reason that the cartridge cases kind of trickle out of the side of the weapon in a graceful fashion, which is not realistic either. And that's because they want to show off the animation. They want the player to be able to see and admire the detail that was going into these circa 2010 graphics. And they were impressive at the time. We saw some judicious use of the Noob Tube there. I'm not sure the recipients would have been overjoyed at that. And those were smoke rounds, which are used for, well, in the game they're used for cover. Now, at the ranges we saw there is not sufficient arming time, because a 40mm grenade arms in terms of how many rotations it's described before it hits what it's aimed at. And at that distance, there is not sufficient distance/time for the thing to arm. So it would just go thunk. And I imagine it would hurt quite a bit. And if it hit you in the face, it would probably knock you out of the fight. But it wouldn't explode in a lethal fashion. Of course, being a smoke round, it's not meant to be lethal anyway. But any explosive going off close to you, the concussion of it is potentially going to incapacitate you regardless. As it does burst open, there will be some limited fragmentation as well, although it's designed not to do that. Would it kill somebody? Let's not find out. So this representation of the G3 functions a little differently than quite a few of them. I'm thinking in particular of Call of Duty, where from memory it tends to be a semi-automatic designated marksman class weapon. Here it's very much as it was originally conceived, so an assault rifle really, albeit firing a full power cartridge. What's often called today a battle rifle, but I reject that term. It's not a particularly meaningful term. So it's a bit too controllable. So designed as a select fire weapon, so you can fire accurate single shots, or you can fire bursts, or hold down the trigger and dump the magazine. In reality, that is completely worthless. The recoil of the G3 is significant. The intent of that select fire capability was really for, busting indoors, jumping into a trench, and you'd be firing it from the hip, looking where you're aiming in the traditional old-fashioned assault position. You would not be firing automatic from the shoulder. The player there is doing good execution, as they used to say, with his automatic G3, but in reality he would struggle, except at close range. So this is pretty much the SCAR L that you see in the game, and this, unlike the XM8, this did enter US service. They are still around in Delta Force, some other units, but not the light version. This was found to be, I believe there were reliability issues. It's pretty well modelled in the game. It does suffer from the weird left-hand ejection issue. The rear sight is an odd one as well. This has got the actual FN backup sights, and as you can see, it's an adjustable for height rear aperture, an L-shaped, tiny little adjustable, two different sizes. So a more open aperture for close range work, and a sort of more diopter-esque one for longer ranges, and then you twist it to adjust the height. That's not what we see in the game. We just see a weird little stump with a V-notch cut in it. Don't think that's based on a real one. I think that was just a bit of a fudge. The USAS 12 fully automatic shotgun. It's quite well represented in the game. If I remember rightly, this was one of my go-to weapons when I was playing the game originally. 10-round drum magazine on there. It's automatic, but it's quite controllable. In fact, it's so slow that you could pretty much just make do with semi-automatic, but it is full auto. It's not quite iconic, but it's got a certain recognition factor. It's got that weird morphed AR-15 look to it with the carrying handle, and obviously it is an AR-15 pistol grip, and this whole part of the receiver is based on the AR. It is like a sort of cartoon M16 that fires 12 gauge rounds, and the real gun isn't much less ridiculous than that sounds. The MG3 makes an appearance, specifically the MG3, not a legacy MG42. Although I think people would be surprised to know how much the same gun those are. This one's a weird one because it's fitted with a Russian Cobra red dot sight, but hey, we're meant to be the Russians, I assume. Now, in reality, that sight would not fit the NATO/Picatinny rail that you do find on some MG3s on the top cover, which is, I guess, a difference between that and the MG42. And it's one of the only guns in the game that feeds from the correct side. Feeds from the left, ejects to the right. Because it's a belt-fed MG, you're seeing the belt of cartridges getting fed into the gun from the feed device. Because it's kind of held centrally, you get to see them come out the side a bit to the right as well. As you can tell, it's a bit of a pet peeve. So the sidearm here is actually an M92 or M9 Beretta, but the name and the icon are the M93R, the burst fire stablemate of the M92. So we've got a full auto M92. And I don't remember this, but I'm guessing they ran out of time or changed plans or something and had to use a standard M9 model for their machine pistol. It also shouldn't, well, it looked to be firing automatic rather than in burst, which it shouldn't do. The M93R can only do 3-round burst, as any Robocop fan knows. And then the primary weapon there was the big old Barrett M95. Not the iconic M82/M107, but the M95, which is A, bullpup, so trigger in front of the breech, and B, bolt action. An odd choice on the face of it, but of course it offers built-in gameplay balance because it slows the rate of fire down without having to fudge it in any way. So a clever choice, I think. The MG36, not a light machine gun you see particularly often in video games. So another eclectic choice by the Battlefield developers. We've got one behind me somewhere. That's got a rail carry handle fitted to it. This one is depicting the Bundeswehr standard configuration, except that, from memory in that short clip I've just seen, I don't think it incorporates the dual sights that it should do. So the Bundeswehr version has a 3-power magnified sight and a red dot sight, and you just raise your head up and down to use both. Very good for the time, or a bit limiting later on when technology moved on and there were better options available. Yeah, it's only at this point that I remember or realised that the class system in this Battlefield game was a little curious. The idea of the medic not carrying a shorter, lighter weapon and actually carrying a longer, heavier weapon, light machine gun, which I've completely forgotten was the case, is a bit curious because, well, for one thing, medics are typically armed with the standard service rifle. There's then the practical element of you're carrying additional medical equipment and an absolute ton of ammo for quite a heavy, bulky weapon. So it's a real contradiction that you're the one laying down the hate on the enemy with a machine gun and then running over and patching them up. But hey, you know, class systems have to work some way. All right, well, I'm chortling to myself because that was some really well played bit of anti-tank, anti-aircraft. I find anti-tank a bit underwhelming in a lot of video games. You really don't feel like you're doing very much. This game, you really felt like you were making a difference, and you felt like the sort of threat that infantry anti-tank weapons really do pose to armoured vehicles. You know, there's a reason why tank battles are much less a thing on the modern battlefield. Ever since effective, lightweight, portable, shape charge warheads became a thing, whether they're from a recoilless weapon or a rocket launcher, you know, in an urban environment especially, you are in serious trouble if you're in a tank. It caused another arms race effectively between explosive reactive armour, bar armour, to try and keep armoured vehicles in the running, because otherwise, you know, any Tom, Dick or Harry with an anti-tank weapon could take you out. And this game gave you that. And it was very satisfying to watch that munition go in at a slight arc and chunk and you take them out, which is what we saw there. And the weapon in question was the Carl Gustaf, which is actually quite an old design. The original design is immediately post-war, 1948. And it actually came out of service, certainly in the US Armed Forces, and then came back in an upgraded but recognisable form. British Armed Forces are still using it. So yeah, a bit of a legend, the old Charlie G. If you'd like to help us out here at the Royal Armouries, we've got links in the description. One of the best ways you can help us is to come and see us, because we are open again now if you're close enough to do that. We've also got our own series of short videos on some of the objects in the collection here, so head over to the Royal Armouries channel and check those out, and I'll see you again on another one of these soon.